We are back. You're watching the Draft Academy. There's plenty to go through today with West Ham and Leicester seemingly potentially turning a corner, and some blank game weeks coming up soon. Going to look at what to do with that. Joining me is Jared Angel. And Ange, before we get into it, the masses have spoken. Rashford has scored 2 more goals since we last spoke. You're getting a bit nervous about our bet? Wishing you had maybe taken my Rashford for Salah trade? My hypothetical Rashford for Salah trade?
No. Look, if we go and have a look at those games played, Rashford's 3 games ahead of Salah right now. So we've got a bit of time since our conversation. United have played twice since then. Liverpool haven't played yet.
Rashford scored twice since then.
Like we say, Liverpool haven't played yet. We got a nice Merseyside derby coming up, so Mo can always gets excited for games as such. I'm not worried yet.
Very, very optimistic. So like I mentioned, Ange, over the last couple of weeks, not going to get too excited. It's only about the last 3 weeks that West Ham and Leicester have seemingly turned their seasons around somewhat, finding a little bit of form. Right now, I'll be the first one to admit I have been slating Brendan Rodgers since before the season started, right? I kind of feel like he's a manager who can take you to a certain point and then he kind of, that's as much as you're going to get from him. I did hear a very interesting thing this weekend. It was from a Man City fan. He's a lifelong Man City fan. He's not one of these guys who just became a City fan after the Sheikh Mansour took over the club. And he was saying, what you need to appreciate is if you're a club like Leicester, you're in dreamland, right? Winning an FA Cup is, the dream for clubs outside of the traditional big clubs, right? Fighting for Champions League places is the dream for clubs outside of the Champions League club. So have I been a bit harsh on Brendan? Do you think that Leicester are going to have a strong end to the season?
Look, I think I've always given you a bit of pushback on your Leicester comments, specifically this season. I've said it that this season and the prior season, they have been unlucky with injury. There hasn't been too much investment with a little bit of outside stuff that needed to be sorted out. And it seems like without Maddison, they never really seem to perform. We always see these very big dips when he's injured, and I think Brendan is the kind of manager, I think he's right for Leicester. Do you feel someone else comes in and can do better for Leicester than Brendan has done?
So look, again, I've said it already. I do acknowledge that the investment hasn't been there, but I do still feel that the squad is too good to be where they're sitting in the log. So I won't go on too much about that. Could Leicester afford to pay the likes of Simeone? I don't think so. I think as soon as Simeone leaves Atletico, he's earmarked for a bigger club than that. Mm-hmm. But, I think, if we look at the likes of Brighton, there are managers out there that can get a job done. Where I will agree with you and where I think things get particularly interesting from a draft perspective is, something you've touched on with Liverpool before, right, is that key players coming back do have a massive impact on the squad. And James Maddison is one of the best players in the Premier League. Right, he's a really talented guy, and him being back, we've seen just after one game, really does open up things for Leicester, rather. Right, I do feel Leicester's a very well-run club. I do feel a better manager would get a lot more out of that team, but at this stage of the season, I wouldn't make any hasty moves just yet. Right, but from a draft perspective, okay. I still don't trust that defense. I wouldn't be rushing to pick up any Leicester defenders. But, having said that, if we look at, their attacking options, Nacho had a really good weekend this weekend, and we know what he's capable on when he's on form. Ducker's had an okay season, but, with the right people in midfield, could really kickstart something. There's Barnes, there's Dewsbury Hall. With Maddison back, are there any players in this Leicester team that you feel could have a strong end to the season and give your team a fighting chance to end off the season well?
Sure. So, for the past 2 seasons, I've been fortunate enough to catch Iheanacho on these upward form moves that he does. Unfortunately, it doesn't last forever. You're going to get 6, 7 great games out of him, and then all of a sudden he's going to disappear again. So, if you're able to maybe find him in the free market right now, then cool, go for it. To give up, also to try and trade him, my concern there would be this doesn't last. He's such a form-based player. And outside of that, I would imagine the Madison owners probably held, Harvey Barnes owners probably held. I feel like there's other strikers right now over Jamie Vardy and Daka that may be a better option for you to find that's there. So, yeah, and like you mentioned, the defense, nothing to be too excited about. Drewsby blows hot and cold as well. So, yeah, from a draft perspective, I'm not diving at the Leicester team, to answer your question in short. Yeah, so yeah, carry on.
So I want to come back to the Iheanacho thing in a little while. The one thing I do want to touch on, though, is Harvey Barnes, right? Because I do agree with you. It's always more difficult to try and trade for a player when he has been held for a long period of time, dealing with injuries, then coming back on form. But one thing I do feel with Harvey Barnes is that Harvey Barnes is one of those players that we know how good he is, but he always tends to somewhat underperform. And I think that's a combination of injuries and Leicester blowing hot and cold. So I do think, if you're willing to take a punt, Harvey Barnes could be quite an easy player to get off someone's hands, right? Again, it would be a bit of a punt because I do think you would have to, try and use like a Matoma or someone like that to get a Harvey Barnes. So there is a lot of risk involved, but we know how good he is. He gets a lot of touches in the box and, just maybe someone to keep an eye on. I wouldn't go trying to trade for Harvey Barnes right now, but, I would watch Leicester games, because obviously if he goes on a tear, you're not going to get him. But if you watch the games, do the eye test, and you think that maybe something's coming there, maybe something worth looking out for, right? I personally feel the same way I feel about West Ham the way you feel about Leicester at the moment, right? They've also had an okay run of games. I think they haven't lost in their last 3. I think there are 2 draws in that, so not like they've had a massive turn of form, although there was one big FA Cup win in the mix there. But looking at that team, Jared Bowen's come back to form. He is the opposite of Harvey Barnes. He does have a big kind of reputation behind him. So now that he has gone on a bit of a run, going to be hard to trade for Bowen. But you look at the rest of that team, Antonio is having a shocker of a season. I did call it, but that's for another time. So, I wouldn't be rushing out for him. I thought Danny Ings looked pretty good this weekend against Chelsea, coming off the bench as a substitute. So maybe something there. Benrahma had a little run of form a couple of weeks ago, but that seems to have dissipated. Clean sheets are a no-go for me when it comes to West Ham. So even though they have been on this run of 4 games where they've looked better, anyone from West Ham that you think might have some upside there?
Yeah, look, I'm a Paqueta holder, and actually he's a really good player. But like you mentioned, West Ham aren't having their best season. So he's up and down from injury, but I do think he adds value to that side. So, yeah, him, like you mentioned, Danny Ings, true professional. He will score goals. Will we ever see him at those Southampton levels again? I don't think so. But, yeah, let it play out a bit, they probably should have lost this weekend. This isn't to show that we go and attack refereeing, but, so makes the result look a little bit better to Chelsea.
Definitely.
But, yeah, let's see over the next 2-3 games what David Moyes can do if he's really turned this around.
Yeah, look, I fully agree with that. I do think Danny Ings is well worth looking at if you feel you can get him, simply because Antonio is just nowhere at the moment. And look, Antonio is a good player. I do think that
Samaka's
he will have
holding
his
an
battles.
injury.
Well, that was my next point. That Skamaka is holding an injury. They need goals. I think Danny Ings will get utilised. I think he's the perfect player for them at the moment because if you look at, they've got plenty of legs on that field outside of their striking position, right? So they're just going to expect Danny Ings to get in scoring positions and get fed, and better squad than Southampton had when Danny Ings was going on a tear for them. So. Anything could happen there. The one thing I will throw out is there is a blank coming up in game week 25 for Brentford, for Brighton, for United, and for Newcastle, right? Now, obviously, you're not getting rid of your Newcastle and your United players. If you're holding the likes of Ivan Toney's or, Solly Marches, you're not getting rid of them. But if you do need a pickup for that week, with the injury to Paqueta, who I do agree is a really good player, Souček always poses some kind of goal threat when he's on the field. Had a goal disallowed by VAR, this time actually rightfully so disallowed by VAR. So if you're looking for just a 1 or 2 week pickup, I do think that Souček isn't a terrible option, right? One thing I do want to chat about very quickly, Ange, is just a bit of strategy. Right, and I think it's a very important piece of strategy to talk about at this point in the season, right? Because you mentioned earlier that you've held Iheanacho the last couple of seasons when he's been on a good run of form. And I find very often what happens in draft is we either hold on to players for too long because of a brief run of form that they had, or we get rid of players too quickly because of the teams that they play for, right? Now, I've been guilty of this. I kind of panicked a couple of weeks ago and I dropped Mbuemo just to give myself a little bit of cover in other positions, and then he went on to get a goal and an assist. And I did say previously that he was a season-long hold for me because of the way Brentford are playing, because of the quality he's shown this season, right? Another example of that I've been through this season is I picked up Philip Billing when Bournemouth had just gone through a change of manager. And as we know, very often when there's a change of manager, there's sometimes what happens is the players respond to the change of atmosphere, the change in training, and they go in a couple of really good games, right? And that's exactly what happened to Bournemouth. Billing was the main beneficiary of that, but I was very much aware that this could just be a new manager bump that they were going through. So when Billing hit a couple of games of blanks, I had no problem dropping him for other players that had come on form. On the flip side of that, I hold Morgan Gibbs-White. Now, he does tend to blow hot and cold, but I think that's not because of him. That's because of Forest, right? He impresses me every single time I watch them, and because he's on set pieces, because he is a really good player, he's a season-long hold for me, right? And I think Iheanacho, as you highlighted, is a player that pick him up when he's on form, but just keep an eye on the market to see if there's any way you can upgrade your team. Right? Any players that you feel play in smaller teams, like your Willians, like your Mitrovic's, that you believe should just be long-term holds, or conversely, players that you think are on good form that you should maybe look to trade or just kind of keep an eye on the waiver wire in case that good run of form comes to an abrupt halt?
Sure. So you just mentioned Mitrovic, so I'll start there. I think he's actually a very good example for this, having blanked in his last 5 games. So, someone like that, you're just going to hold through the season because he's going to get his, this season, more than likely around 15 goals, and you're probably not going to find something that's available that will return better, unless you want to try and use him in a trade. So in a player like Mitrovic's situation, that's how I would be looking to play it. Another player to use in those examples is Nanto from Leeds, who I recently just picked up. Great looking player, really, really showing what he can do. Unfortunately for Leeds, as we saw again in the United game yesterday, they're just so impotent when it comes to finishing, and a player like that, he's just going to be worth it through the season. So I'm going to hold for now, and see how that plays out, because I have actually somehow watched Leeds' last 4 games, and I think they've been. I almost feel sorry for Jesse March. I think they've been great in there. And it looks like he's going to be the new Southampton manager as well.
Yeah,
so that will be interesting. other players like that, like we've already discussed him on the show, but Paqueta is another player that would come back into this mold, a really good player in a team like West Ham who just haven't had it going. And, I have a partner in my draft, and many a time we've discussed, do we drop him, do we not drop him? What we're going to do here, because we're not getting the returns we want. But he's a really good player, and when West Ham do find that run of form, it's more than likely we will start getting those returns. So in this kind of situation, I think it also comes down to, like the team, the manager, and, also if you see a good run of fixtures coming, sometimes a team can have a really tough run of fixtures. They're not in a vein of form. And, sometimes a nice run of fixtures can help along an improvement of a side, which again comes along with the improvement of players, of which we recently saw from West Ham. And also it comes down to how your team's laid out. If you've been lucky enough at this stage of the season to collect some decent players in the free market as it's gone along, and you do have one or two spaces in your team where you can take risk, that's where you can hold these players.
Yeah, 100%. Speaking of form, good run of fixtures, something you mentioned there. Best run of fixtures coming up over the next couple of weeks is Arsenal, Brentford, and Brighton. Okay. Now, with regards to Brentford and Brighton, they do blank in game week 25, but Brentford playing Palace, Brighton playing Fulham. Look, obviously there aren't going to be any Arsenal players that are available at the moment, bar maybe like a Xhaka or one or two other players. Martinelli is a possible trade target at this stage of the season because he has blanked in his last 5 or 6. Right, and if you're willing to pay a pretty high price, you could very potentially scoop up Martinelli. But I'm willing to bet in most drafts there are a couple of Brentford and Brighton defenders available, which could definitely be well worth a look in, as well as one or two midfielders that could be there. Right, so that's definitely something to look out for. Anything else you want to add before we end off, Ange?
Just some other teams to mention that I actually think have some really good fixtures. Just to pick up off where you left off. These are obviously more of the more obvious teams to look at. I think City, Chelsea, and Liverpool have an amazing run of fixtures coming up. These aren't going to be majority players that you're going to find lying around. But just quickly before we run, we've mentioned a few players in this episode, such as your Harvey Barnes, your Mitrovic's, Jared Bowens, and those are the type of players you mixed with one or two others you could try and pull assets from these three teams who have nice fixtures coming out.
Yeah, 100%. Big Merseyside derby tonight, as you mentioned. Ange, if we get an Everton win and a Liverpool blank, are we finally going to concede that it's time to ship Mo Salah and bring in those Everton players?
I don't expect that to happen, but I can't judge anything of Liverpool right now. So, like I say, let's see Everton for a game or two. We held a poll on Twitter on that, by the way, and the results are not too far apart.
Of which you lost both.
But I'm not talking about the solo, I'm talking about Everton assets. It was 60-40, so there is still a few logical people there that are holding out to be like, let's see what happens. But we'll pick that up. We'll pick that up on the next episode, and
a few logical people that are probably holding Tomiyasu instead of picking up some Everton assets.
I just for our viewers, just so that Ryan over here has Everton assets who are sitting on his bench for this game week. But so we'll have to see where that real faith is.
Firepower that I've got, with the firepower I've got going at the moment. I mean, I've got 10 Solly March points sitting on the bench at the moment. That's just the kind of firepower I'm dealing with at the moment, bro.
Let's see how we go.
Great, Ange, thanks for your time. Really appreciate it, bro. Thanks everyone for listening. We always appreciate that. We'll be back with next week with some more Draft Academy. Hope everyone's looking good for the second half of the season, looking at some good silverware. And until next week, we'll be back with some more Draft Academy. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, guys.